Jim Berg. He was the Dean of Students at Bob Jones University. And so I will give credit where credit is due. The outline is his. If you see anything incorrect, that's probably me, because I took his outline and then modified it for my own purposes. But if you like to do the fill in the blank thing, did everybody get one that wishes they had one? I should ask that question. So if you like to do that, I do have the blanks there. The blank has a line underneath it. So if that interests you, enjoy. If that doesn't interest you, again, it doesn't have to be something you do. As we work through the book of Ecclesiastes, it's the secrets of the good life. We are at lesson 6. What about double-crossers, dictators, and death? And so we're working through the second section, or the second discourse. Ecclesiastes, I think, would break into 4 little sermons, or 4 little sections. So we did the first discourse, that's chapter 1 through chapter 2. The second discourse, which is where we're in now, is chapter 3 through chapter 5, verse 20. And last week we looked at some broad limitations for man, and that was the first 15 verses of chapter 3. And now we're into some specific frustrations for man, and that's going to be the end of chapter 3 through the beginning of chapter 5. And so as we work through this, again, recognizing that Ecclesiastes is going to work through 2 different things. There are going to be goads, things that poke you and tell you, all right, you need to think about this. This isn't comfortable. Maybe you should change course. Maybe you should think differently. And so throughout Ecclesiastes, we've got a lot of goads. And then occasionally we have a nail, which is a tent stake, something that you firmly holds the tent in place while the wind blows around. So a goad is to poke you, to tell you, all right, there's got to be something beyond this life. Those are the goads. The nails are God and God's truth. And so again, the first goad is the goad of injustice. This is in chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, that reads this way. I believe it's the New King James. Moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. And in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. So the places that were supposed to be places of judgment or justice, he found wickedness. In the place where there should have been righteousness, there was sin. Verse 17. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. As we think about the goad of injustice, again, depending on how old you are, you could think back through your life and think of many different times that it felt like the bad guys were getting away with something. Again, one of the first things that came across in my little world, I was a young man. I remember the trial of O.J. Simpson. And really the TV trial that they made it to be. And again, you can think what you want. I'll tell you what this little boy thought, which I would have been like 7 or 8 years old. Based on what I was seeing, what Dan Rather was telling us every couple of nights, it seemed like he was guilty. And he got away with it. Now again, you can disagree with my presumption. This is my point. My point is not just about O.J. Simpson. My point is, throughout my life, there's been a lot of people that feel like they're getting away with things. And depending on your political bent, you may think that the current president is one of those people, or you may not. And again, my point here is not to point out whether I think he is or isn't. My point here is to point out what? As we live through life, we all notice that there is injustice. That often justice is based not on what you've done, but on who you know. I had a friend. He went to the airport, and as they put his briefcase through the scanner, they discovered he had a pistol in his briefcase. Now, just to say this straightly, if you want to go on an airplane ride, let me just give you a basic recommendation. Do not take a pistol. Now, again, just for sake of honesty, if I did that, I'm probably going to end up in custody for a while. Just a guess. He didn't. Why? Because he was the Speaker of the House of the state of Michigan. And because they knew Lee Chatfield, the policeman looked at him and said, Mr. Chatfield, what are you doing with a pistol? And Mr. Chatfield could honestly say, I forgot it was in there. Now, when Lee Chatfield said that, they took his word for it. If I were walking through there, I don't know if they would have. Because again, the policeman doesn't know Glenn Shaw. Which again, in some ways is a blessing, in some ways is a curse. What is my point? My point is sometimes justice comes down to who you know, who you are. Maybe it's not such big people. Maybe it's little things. I remember as a child, I had a sibling that I thought was getting away with something. And that goad of injustice. And I remember telling my parents, if I had done what he did, I wouldn't have been able to sit down for a week. And you gave him a dirty look and moved on. What happened to my parents? And they laughed and told me that I didn't understand, and that may very well be true. But my point to you in bringing up that ancient illustration is, sometimes as a sibling, I will see injustice and it makes me mad. Why didn't my parents come down as hard on them as they always do on me? Why can't I have justice? And our desire for justice isn't always logical. I want to just remind you briefly of the story of Esther. You may remember the story. Esther is in the process, there's a man by the name of Haman, and Haman has convinced the king that in a couple of months they're going to kill all of the Jews. Like every Jew is fair game, and you can take whatever the Jews have and pocket the wealth. The reason Haman wants to do this is because this guy by the name of Mordecai won't bow down to him as he's walking down the street. Haman is in a really powerful position. He's got the ear of the king. And in the process of this going on, Haman is invited to be one of the 2 guests at the queen's party. You remember, it's just the king and Haman. And Haman is on cloud 9, to put it in modern vernacular. He's on cloud 9. He's having a great time. And on his way home after the party, he sees Mordecai. And Mordecai, as Mordecai always does nothing. Everybody else is bowing down. Mordecai won't bow down. And you may recall that when Haman comes into his house and he's talking to his wife and his friends, he says this: everything's great in life except one thing goes me. Mordecai is not doing what's right. And the injustice of Mordecai not bowing down takes away all the enjoyment I could have of being on top of the world. Again, you won't find that in actual translation worded that way. That's my wording of what he said. And what is the point there? When we perceive, real or unreal, when we perceive injustice, it removes our enjoyment of life. It goads us. Someone got away with something. At least we think they did. Again, whether they did or not, we may never know. This makes a person turn and say, when will there be justice? Where will there be justice? This brings us to our nail. God will judge. And we found that in verse 17. That God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. Everyone will be held accountable. But here's where the nail, which is excellent, and it's very encouraging when I think of all the bad guys that, from my perspective, were getting away with things. This brings also a bit of nervousness to me personally. Because as I realize God is going to judge everyone, and I'm really excited because that means the bad guy's going to get caught, there's a pause here because none of us actually want complete justice. I want the bad guys to get caught. But I'd like mercy for Glenn occasionally, because Glenn doesn't always do what Glenn ought to do. And so the reality is, as I think about the nail God will judge, that's also a terror to me in certain aspects. Because that means God is not just going to judge Haman. God is going to judge Glenn. And the Bible tells me that the wages of sin is death. Therefore, when God judges, and if there has ever been any sin in Glenn's life, Glenn deserves eternal death. That's a problem for Glenn, because I have sinned. Therefore, I do deserve the eternal judgment of God. But that verse doesn't stop there. The wages of sin is death. The verse goes on to say, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ, my Lord. There's where the hope is. God will judge, but God offers to judge himself. and allowed the payment Jesus Christ made on the cross. We sang that about that. He is able to deliver thee. And he makes it possible for a name, my name, to be written down in glory, to be confirmed or promised to live in heaven for eternity. And I'm going to be able to sing at the close of the service, oh, that will be glory for me. When all my labors and trials are o'er, and I am safe on that beautiful shore, just to be near the one I adore, will through eternity, or through the ages, is what the old song says, be glory for me. Why will it be glory for me? Because, again, I deserve God's judgment. But because of Jesus Christ, I have his mercy. So again, the goad is a goad of injustice. The nail is God will judge. And this kind of brings me logically to the next goad, the goad of death. The goad of death we find in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 18 through 22. Again, allow me to read. It says this: I said in my heart concerning the conditions of the sons of men, God tests them, that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over animals, for all is vanity. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. I think we read that already. Verse 20. All go to one place. All are from dust, and all return to dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which goes upward, and the spirit of the animal, which goes down to the earth? So I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works. For that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Death is a goad. Standing over the shell of someone who recently left leaves us wondering, what's the point? I've not just had to take care of a human body. I've had to bury some animals in my time. And I watch as an animal dies and then it ceases to exist. You think, all right, as I view the shell, the carcass, or what, I don't know how to say that graciously, the body of the animal and the body of a person, they're both dead. And they both came from dust. God created them on day 6 out of dust, formed them, and they both returned to dust. After a number of days to years, an animal is dust. After, again, depending on how we've dealt with the body, a human body switches to dust. And death holds fear over many people. The comedian Woody Allen famously said this: I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens. And the reality is many people view death that way. They claim they're not afraid to die. They just don't want to have it happen to them. And it's amazing to watch a person that tries to hold on to their life as they feel it going away, because what happens when I die? The goad of human existence is what happens when a human dies. What's different from an animal? And the nail is the spirit of man goes upward. Furthermore, verse 22, since you aren't in charge of your future any more than you are your present, learn to rejoice in the beauty of this time, something an animal cannot do. So we have the goad of injustice and the goad of death. But we have the opportunity to enjoy life in a way that the animals are not able, and we have the reality that there is life after death. The human spirit continues to live. So again, we've had the goad of injustice, the goad of death. This brings us to the third goad, the goad of loneliness. And loneliness really covers chapter 4, verses 1 through verse 16. We're going to cover them kind of section at a time. The first one is, the bottom is lonely when there is no comforter. So again, the bottom is lonely when there's no comforter. That's Ecclesiastes 4, verses 1 through 3. It says this: Then I returned and